What is up, everyone? Welcome to How to Draw Legs. Make sure to head over to the website and grab the free worksheet. The link is in the description. Print out the worksheets if you're working traditionally. If you're working digitally, you can pull that file into whatever software you are using. Starting on page 1, we're starting with cylinders. So this is very similar to how we started off the arm tutorial. We're starting with cylinders because that's the base shape. These shapes are different, so even if you did the arm worksheets, this page is different, so don't worry, you're not just doing the exact same cylinders, but this is the basis for most of the limbs, right? These cylinder shapes is the simplified version of the limbs. The importance of drawing these simplified forms is the versatility of these shapes, right? These forms, you can use them to construct almost anything. That's why we start with these very simplified forms, because that translates into everything else you're drawing if it's in 3D, right? You can use these shapes to construct and understand more complex forms, right? So start with page 1, copy from the examples, make sure to use an eraser if you need to. Don't be shy about using eraser. Making mistakes is the whole point of using a tutorial, right? Like if you're not learning something new, why do it at all, right? This should be something that you're practicing regularly. These shapes are very useful. Copy that, and then on page 2, so once you're done page 1, move on to page 2. On page 2, we're adding in 2 spheres, right? Just like the arm, this is bringing us one step closer to drawing the legs, right? We want to start constructing the base shapes, right? So these spheres will become the joints. So you can imagine how these spheres are the joints of the hip and the knee. And a copy from these examples, make sure to pay attention to where the cylinders and the spheres overlap, right? So you can tell which form is in the front, which one is the closest to us, the viewer, based on which one is overlapping, right? So if you look at the top left example, the sphere at the top is the one that's closest to us. That's why it's overlapping the cylinder. And then the cylinder is over top of the bottom sphere, because the bottom sphere is behind the cylinder, right? So pay attention to how these overlap things are happening, because this is a very important point when drawing something in 3D. Is we want to understand how we're creating the 3D illusion on paper, right? Because that's not something that comes naturally drawing 3D on a 2D surface. It's an illusion we're trying to create, right? And overlaps a big component of that, like I mentioned in the arm tutorial. So once you're done this, copy from the examples, and once you're done this, I recommend doing some of these in your sketchbook to make sure that you understand how to draw these spheres and cylinders. Invent some of your own, draw some from memory, and then once you're done that, you can move on to page number 3. On page number 3, we're adding in another cylinder, right? So this is a step closer to how to draw legs, right? These look more like legs because you have the top of the leg, the knee, and then the bottom portion of the leg, right? So this is the most simplified form we can create of the legs, right? These proportions aren't exact, but this gives you some sense of how you can simplify down to the legs, right? So copy from these examples, pay attention to overlap again, right? How are we seeing these forms in space, right? If you see the bottom right example, you can see that that first cylinder is moving away from us. That's why we can see the top of it. But the second cylinder is coming towards us. That's why we can see the bottom of that cylinder, right? You can see that in the bottom right example, how this is moving in space, that we're creating this illusion. That's why that sphere, the middle sphere, is behind both of the cylinders, because both of those cylinders are closer to us than that sphere, right? So pay very close attention to that. Copy from the examples. You can pull up some reference of legs and simplify down to these shapes by using photo reference and seeing how, I can simplify down, draw in these shapes, and that will help you construct your mental model of how you could draw the legs in the future, right? We can use these mannequin shapes to simplify down the entire figure, and that way it'll be much easier to memorize how to draw the figure, right? Because if you jump straight into drawing the specific anatomy, that's very difficult to remember. It's very difficult to remember the specific shapes, and it's completely unnecessary It's completely unnecessary to jump that step right from the beginning, right? Start simple, then build your knowledge up towards more complex things. That way you can apply that knowledge across the board, right? If you just memorize the shapes of the legs, just the forms, and you can just draw in those shapes, that limits the amount you can use that knowledge, right? Because then you could only draw legs. But if you learn it this way, using these 3D shapes, now you can apply that same knowledge across the board. No matter what you want to draw, that knowledge will become useful because you know how to create the illusion of something 3D in space, and you know how to simplify something down to its base forms, right? So that's why we were doing this. I know this might seem tedious. If you've done a bunch of my tutorials, you know how I always start with these simplified forms, but this is really important. This is where the hard parts of drawing come in, right? This is the most crucial element, and that's why we always start with these things. So covering the examples, and once you've done that, move on to the last page. On the last page, we are drawing in actual legs. This is like actual anatomy copied from photo references, right? These are using the most realistic elements we can and then drawing in the actual shapes, the actual forms of the leg, right? So if you're interested in learning a specific anatomy of the leg, I recommend that you learn from photo references, study up on that stuff. But if you feel like I kind of just want to draw more simplified shapes, I want to draw like more cartoony characters, maybe more anime where this specific anatomy isn't as important depending on, you know, where you want to go with your work, that really decides what you need to study, right? If you want to do very realistic work, then I recommend studying up on that stuff. If you don't find that stuff interesting, you don't have to force yourself to do anything that you're not interested in, right? So, but do this page, just copy from the examples. I think this was a very useful way of studying from reference, taking something that's already simplified and then drawing it, because that is a great way to memorize, oh, this is how these shapes look in these different angles, right? And once you're done this page, you can study more anatomy from references, right? I'm not going to go over the specific names of the muscles and stuff because I don't feel like that's very useful unless you really want to do a deep dive on that stuff. Remember that it's all about having fun when drawing, so don't get too academic with it unless you actually enjoy that stuff, right? There's temptation to believe that, oh, the more anatomy I study, the better of an artist I am, which is not true, right? The most important part of drawing is connecting with the work, having fun making it, right? So if you feel like, oh, I don't really find realistic drawing that interesting, like a lot of the work I look at isn't even realistic in any way, like even if, like there's no muscle anatomy, right? If you'd like simplified stuff, feel free to lean into that. But if you're interested in drawing more anatomy stuff, I do have more detailed diagrams of the muscles and stuff on the website. If you go over to my website, the link will be in the description. There's like a leg tutorial with all the visuals explaining different muscles, which you can go check that out if you're interested in learning more of the anatomy. But if you're not, just copy this page, just have fun with it, and then decide for yourself where you want to take your work. Thank you guys so much for checking out this tutorial. Hopefully it was useful to you. I know I went over things quite quickly, but I feel like just copying from these examples is the best way to learn. There isn't that much theory that you need to memorize. It's just getting hands-on practice that matters. That's why I make these worksheets, to make sure that you're getting hands-on practice instead of just watching video tutorials, because that's very tempting to do. It's something that I did tons of. I feel like these worksheets get to the point of what actually matters when drawing. It's hands-on practice. Draw as much as you can, right? So draw in your sketchbook all the time. That's really what matters. Develop your drawing habit. That's like the number one thing. If I can give you any piece of advice, is to put aside 5 to 20 minutes every single day and just draw for that time, and draw whatever you want, right? You don't always have to do studies. You can draw from imagination. You can draw from photo references if you like. Draw whatever, but as long as you draw every day, you will improve over time, right? Hopefully this was useful to you. If you liked this, feel free to join the mailing list over on the website or subscribe to the channel. I'll be making a few more tutorials, and I'm going to do more talking videos and personal art stuff, a bunch of stuff in the works, because you know there's only so many tutorials I can make. If you're interested in more tutorials and drawing courses and stuff, check out the website. The link will be in the description. And join the mailing list, because that's the best way for us to stay in touch. I'll see you guys in the next one.